Welcome to the first session in our K4 Reading Institute, our goals for our readers, beginning with the end in mind. My name is Sally Carlin, and I'm the English Language Arts Curriculum Facilitator for our primary centers. I'm glad you're here. Take a moment to consider this quote. What words and phrases strike you as especially important? Literacy is inseparable from opportunity, and opportunity is inseparable from freedom. The freedom promised by literacy is both freedom from ignorance, oppression, poverty, and freedom to do new things, to make choices, to learn. You might have noticed the words opportunity, freedom, promise, freedom from ignorance, freedom to make choices, to do new things. These words speak to the importance of what we're doing over this 5-session institute, coming together to investigate literacy, considering together how to bring our students to the level of literacy learning that will ensure them this opportunity and freedom. At this point in the presentation, we introduced ourselves, finding the kindergarten teachers, the 4th grade teachers, the principals. Joining us virtually, consider this slide your personal welcome. Again, we're glad you're joining us. Now, take a moment to read over the outcomes for the entire Institute series. This is the roadmap for the journey we'll take together. Notice how we begin with the end in mind, considering our broad goals for students, which are always front and center. In Session 2, we'll take a focused look at the skeleton of Guided Reading 101. In our 3rd session, we'll zoom more closely into Guided Reading, considering together how to add power to our Guided Reading lessons. We'll practice planning and delivering an effective text introduction. We'll practice supporting problem solving on the run as our students are reading and encountering text difficulty. And we'll discuss how to plan for powerful managed independent learning, literacy center engagements. Our 4th session will deepen our understanding of the relationship between guided reading and formative assessment. We'll practice taking, scoring, and analyzing running records. We'll discuss powerful teaching points after text reading. Finally, we'll come together in Session 5 to discuss any lingering questions, including how to fit it all in, how to plan your literacy block, and your day. And these are our outcomes for the day. Take a moment to read over these outcomes. We'll be discussing what it means for students to have a reading process. We'll discuss the cueing systems and strategies that our students need to make meaning from text. We'll watch 2 videos of readers to discern the status of their developing reading processes. And these are our norms. Read over these for a minute, please. They should look familiar to you. Of particular importance is the first, taking an inquiry stance. Some of us have been doing guided reading for some time now. Yet, with open minds and an inquiring spirit, we all will discover personal next steps for our teaching practice. Again, we are beginning with the end in mind, our goal for our readers. What do you personally want your readers to learn this year? Take a minute and either on your smartphone or in another tab, go to menti.com. Once at menti.com, enter the digits 24, 93, 94, and answer the questions. What do you want your readers to learn this year? Submit your answers. Come back to this presentation and click on the rectangle on this slide in present mode. It'll show you the goals that you and your colleagues reported for our readers. The bigger the word or phrase, the more the goal was lifted up by our participants. This slide shows a reality that no one listed as a goal, but which is a reality we all face: struggle. Some of our readers struggle. Read over the quote. Struggling readers are people who, for one reason or another, misapprehend the reading process and have not put a reading system together that adds up to meaning. A reading process, a reading system. That is the preeminent goal for our readers. So, a reading process, a system of interlocking understandings and related behaviors that sustain a student as he or she reads. That is our goal, and it's what we're talking about today. But what is a reading process? It is not the ability to decode high-frequency words with automaticity, nor the ability to sound words out, as important as these skills are. A reading process is a system of interlocking understandings and related behaviors that sustain a student as he or she reads, that allow for meaning making, for comprehension. A reading process is thinking through text. So, how do readers make sense of what's on the page? How do they make meaning? How do readers think while reading? Well, they do two things, and we'll attack each of these in order this afternoon. First, readers use sources of information, cueing systems, to guide their problem solving. Second, they use a repertoire of in-the-head strategies. When we see evidence of these two things, we know that a reading process is being built in our students. First, we'll take a look at the cueing systems. What are they? The analogy we'll use here is that of track lighting. The cueing systems are sources of information that students can access as they work through text. Imagine each of these sources of information, these cueing systems, as a light bulb in a track. What we want for our readers is all three bulbs shining brightly, illuminating a text. But we know not all students come to us with the bulbs in their track brightly shined. In addition, some of what we do in the classroom actually dims some bulbs. Let's talk about it. The first bulb we'll look at is meaning, what in your college studies might have been called the semantic cueing system. You know your kids are accessing this source of information if what they read makes sense. The meaning cueing system is comprised of a student's knowledge of the world or the topic at hand, their knowledge about the genre being read and the kind of things that one encounters in that genre, and the knowledge of words and their meanings. So, for example, if a child is reading a fairy tale and encounters a word beginning with the letter C, he or she may remember that in fairy tales, princesses often live in castles. This sense of genre and vocabulary knowledge go together to help the student problem solve that word, castles, even if they do not yet know the consonant LE syllable type. The meaning cueing system is also comprised of students' understanding of story as it unfolds, their sense of story. It's also made up of a student's understanding that the pictures themselves tell a story. So, if a student is reading a book about guests coming to a birthday party, she might see that on every page a different member of the family arrives. She uses that sense of story to predict as she turns the page that the gray-haired man coming to the door is the papa. She reads papa for grandfather, using the meaning cueing system. The next source of information we'll talk about is the structural cueing system, also called the syntactic cueing system. Kids are using structure when they use their knowledge of the way the English language is put together, their knowledge of our grammar patterns as they read. So, reading the text, he went through the student is not searching through every English word that begins with en. They are searching through nouns. He went through an entryway. That's using structure. Students are also using structure when they use their knowledge of book language and the language of poetry to help them problem solve. So reading Once Upon a, we expect students who know book language, who have a bright structure bulb, to simply say time, once upon a time, and not to have to sound that word out. That is using structure. Students who use structure ask, does what I read sound right? Do we say it that way? Finally, the visual cueing system. Students are using visual when they use what they know about letters and sounds, about whole words and parts of words to problem solve. Students using the visual cueing system ask themselves, does that look right? Does what I said look like that word on the page? The student reading the book about the relatives coming to the birthday party might have initially said Papa, but might have noticed that Papa doesn't begin with a G and might have self-corrected to say grandfather. That's using the visual cueing system. This slide involved teachers in an activity. We all practiced identifying which cueing systems children were using as they made miscues or mistakes while reading. The best way for you to take this on would be to open up the Google Doc entitled Thinking About Cueing Systems, uploaded in Google Classroom along with this presentation. Read each of the 11 samples of students' reading behavior. In each, the child's words are presented above the text. So, in the second sample, the child read grandpa, though the text said grandma. We consider the cueing system information presented at the top. If the child's utterance made sense, he or she used meaning. If the child's utterance sounded right, he or she used structure, etc. Take a minute now and consider each sample. Write in the rightmost column the cueing system the child was using as they read. You might write in more than one. Take just a few minutes to tackle these samples. The answers are on the next slide. Here are some answers. Remember, many of these responses might be indicative of more than one cueing system. For example, saying runned for ran. In this example, the student did use meaning. If a student says runned for ran, we know exactly what the student meant, and it makes sense to us and fits the author's message. The student did not, however, use structure. It does not sound right to say runned, though it may be how some students speak. It is not standard English. Some teachers also wanted to indicate that this miscue fits the initial letter in the word. It looks partially right. They both begin with R. So it partially uses visual as well. Look through the rest of these examples and where I put them. Pay attention to any questions you have, and feel free to email me if you have any lingering questions. This slide presents some instructional implications for us to consider. If we want bright cueing system bulbs, there are things we must do and things we must avoid doing. For the meaning cueing system to be bright, we must give students rich experiences and bring the world to our students. We must teach vocabulary and reinforce it every day. We have to read from many genres. We need to focus on growing students' knowledge about the world. We need to ask, does that make sense? And we actually need to read books that make sense. So we've got to avoid some decodable books that just don't make sense. For the structure cueing system to be bright, we need to engage kids in lots of oral language in our classrooms. We need to model correct speech and have students rephrase after our model. We need to read aloud a lot. We need to ask, does that sound right? And for the visual cueing system to be bright, we must teach phonemic awareness and phonics word study in a discrete 20 to 30 minute period every day. And we need to get kids writing. We need to ask, does that look right? You know a word that looks like that. Get your mouth ready. Is there a part you know? So, remember, this is our central question. How do readers think through text? What does a reading process look like? We answered already that readers ask what makes sense, what sounds right, and what looks right. But they do other things as well. Now we'll consider the strategies students use as they make meaning with text. Strategies are in-the-head actions that readers take to make sense of text. They are not directly observable, but they can be inferred by a teacher through close observation and analysis. Strategies can be taught, they can be modeled, they need to be modeled. Once having been taught, teachers ask students to do them. Teachers prompt for them. And strategies also are reinforced. They are named by the teacher when they occur. There is a copy of this strategy wheel in the Google folder that accompanies this presentation. This graphic was created by Gesu Pinnell and Irene Fountas, who wrote the definitive text on guided reading. It presents the strategies as involving thinking within a text, the moves a reader makes to keep going through and within a text, solving words, monitoring and self-correcting, searching and using cueing systems. Thinking beyond a text, using the comprehension strategies of inferring, synthesizing, making connections, predicting, and finally thinking about a text, critiquing and evaluating. The next slide presents another hands-on activity. Here, teacher teams considered cut-out strategy cards. They read these cards, each aloud, and then sorted and grouped the cards in whatever way made sense to their small group. You can find these cards entitled Sorting Strategies, uploaded along with this presentation. At this point, we discussed what the groups came up with as they sorted the strategy cards. Some groups noticed sequence, that some strategies represented early understandings about print and others were more sophisticated. Some groups noticed groupings, that certain cards seemed to go together and congregated around the same cueing system, for example. Some teachers remarked that teaching reading is complex. This next slide helps to illustrate another analogy that attempts to cut through this complexity. Here, the reading process is likened to a rope, with verbal strategies and understandings grouped together in the bottom strands of the rope, and meaning and structure grouped in the topmost strands. The idea here is that we want a strong, balanced, tightly woven rope. The new piece of information that this analogy brings is the phrase, increasingly automatic. We need students to access these understandings with automaticity. So, we don't just look for the presence or absence of these skills and strategies of this thinking process. We look for the degree of control a reader possesses. This degree of control determines our teaching moves. And students show the gamut from no control of a strategy For example, no ability to point crisply under words, to partial control, to full control, to full control with automaticity. In the case of finger pointing, this would mean a self-initiated ability to point crisply under words just when that's needed, at the point of serious difficulty. That's control with automaticity. So, we need to find out what a child can do, can almost do, and cannot do. It's even more complex than we thought. Our end goal is readers who self-initiate strategies and behaviors. At this point, we watched two readers read, Jake, a preschooler, and a first grade student reading for his teacher who is taking a running record. These YouTube excerpts are accessed by clicking on the pictures of the readers in presentation mode on the Google slide. We used the reading checklist uploaded along with this presentation to note their reading behaviors when we saw evidence of them. We looked for degree of control of early reading behaviors, of cueing system use, and of strategy use. We looked to what the teacher or the parent did for the child as an indicator of what the child could not now fully control. If the teacher or the parent was doing it, that's a next step for these children, and it's what next needs to be taught. This slide presents the stages of instruction as presented by Pat Johnson, a Reading Recovery teacher leader. Read over this slide briefly. In this first session, we've been talking about the here's what and the so what stages of instruction. In the here's what stage, we engage in investigation and try to find out what a child can do, can almost do, and cannot do. We consider what a child does when they're stuck. This stage yields a picture of here's what we're dealing with. In the so what stage, teachers reflect on that. So what do we do next? What's the plan? For example, the first grade reader needs to learn to go back and reread, and he needs to do that all the time. Jake needs to learn to consistently use the pictures and point under words. In the next session, we'll begin investigating the now what stage as we look at guided reading. We'll talk about the then what stage when we investigate running records and ask ourselves, is our plan working? Is our instruction moving kids? The extended learning opportunity, or ELO, from this session invited teachers to fill in a reading checklist, the same one they used with the videos, but this time on one of the readers from their own classroom. Many teachers completed this ELO and sent their scanned checklists to me or through district mail for feedback and an emailed PGP certificate. You are invited to do the same. We ended with this final quote: "Reading furnishes the mind only with materials of knowledge. It is thinking that makes what we read ours." This quote reemphasizes that it is thinking that matters. Thinking indicates a reading process. Finally, I asked teachers to please respond to a Google form sent out asking for feedback. You are invited to do the same, to share your thoughts. What seemed important from today? What implication is there for your practice? And what might you take on right away? Thank you for learning alongside us, and see you next time.